Welcome to the Ignition Zone podcast. I am so excited to be sharing this reflection with you this Youth Day in South Africa. And for me, the work that we do will always center around how do we tackle some of the most difficult challenges in a rapidly changing world. And of course, artificial intelligence is that world, or it's creating that sense of change in this world. So for me, it is an exciting opportunity to reflect on how we think about youth development on the continent and in South Africa, especially because Africa is home to one of the youngest populations in the world, and it is going to persist. Welcome to the Ignition Zone, your go-to podcast where we ignite ideas, spark transformation, and fuel the journey to unlocking Africa's economic potential. I am your host, Matebe Zobo, and I'm so excited to take you on this incredible adventure into the world of economic development, entrepreneurship, and career growth. So as we tackle this conversation, I want us to really start somewhere. Not necessarily in Johannesburg or Rwanda or wherever else, or Nairobi. I want us to think about what happened recently in Stanford University in the United States, where university students walked out or staged a walkout during the Google CEO's commencement speech. This gives you a clue in terms of the worry and the uncertainty that they are thinking about in a world where they've just graduated from one of the top universities in the world. And yet they're facing a reality in which entry jobs are narrowing. They're narrowing at an alarming rate because of the fact that it is now easier for certain tasks to be done more productively and even more efficiently by artificial intelligence. So reports can be read and summarized in minutes. What used to be, for example, an entry job to do market research, as an example, searching and crawling the web or reading a bunch of articles and highlighting and making notes, what used to be available to a young person is now no longer available because the same reports can be literally pulled from at a click or with a small prompt. They can be pulled and summarized from large language models like ChatGPT and others in a matter of seconds. So of course, these young people are concerned about their ability to enter into the workplace and increasingly finding it harder and harder to do that. So that's the first point of reference that I want us to look at. The other is a conversation, one that doesn't happen too often anymore, but one that used to happen quite a lot between or among tech billionaires and recently trillionaires, which is that as the world evolves and as artificial intelligence stretches in terms of its phase and scope and ability, we're going to find that more and more people have to be on universal basic income. And so that is a conversation that really is one that we should all be paying attention to, but most importantly, has an ability to disrupt the nature of poverty reduction as we know it. And I'll give you a formula. For some of us, this is how some of us have managed to come from smaller households and have been able to find economic progress. Essentially, the formula really for getting out of poverty used to really be a straight one. Have access to education, skills, have an entry-level job that then you're able to build your career upon and earn. However, with the advent of artificial intelligence and the way in which the manner in which these entry-level jobs are becoming inaccessible, and the manner in which education in itself is quite complex and becoming disrupted, it's becoming clear that this formula is no longer a safe path, or that we need to really rethink it and think about how nations like South Africa, which boast one of the highest unemployment or youth unemployment in the world, need to approach this. So currently South Africa has many programs and many policies that try and address this challenge in a predictable manner. And one such policy is the National Youth Policy of 2020 to 2030, which recognizes the importance of education, skills development, entrepreneurship, and economic participation. The other is the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which is specifically designed to strengthen pathways from learning to earning. So these policies exist, and government is increasingly utilizing, programs such as learnerships to get young people into workplaces. However, the challenge with this is, or the challenge with these interventions, is that typically they are very much they're very much done from a compliance perspective. They're not done with meaning in mind. And lastly, young people don't really get the skills that they need to navigate their careers or to even start meaningful businesses. And hence, high youth unemployment continues to persist. So what are the important models that we can sort of look at? Yesterday as I was reading, I came across a post that says China has completely overhauled about 12,000 degrees or learning pathways, because they are increasingly wanting to redirect their youth to digital skills, artificial intelligence, robotics, manufacturing, etc. So one of the key things that we should be doing in our various countries is to really look at which degrees will be relevant, which learning skills will be relevant, or learning pathways will be relevant, and redirect young people to those pathways. The other day I was watching a podcast by the Financial Times, and they were talking about how, because these jobs are increasingly, or entry jobs are increasingly disappearing, they have found a mechanism in which young people can be attached to an organization with no payment whatsoever, but with the idea that whatever skills that they came into would be enhanced and made relevant to the ever fast changing world. And that definitely provides a pathway for young people. And of course, South Africa is quite unique in a sense that young people already are facing poverty constraints in terms of access to, healthcare, food, and so on. And so the question really remains, would young people actually get into these programs without being paid? However, what matters the most, I think, is to be able to think about an environment where the skills that emerge from those programs actually future-proof those young people more than the current sort of stipend-led learnership programs that also have various compliance factors attached to it. So that's one model. Singapore offers a similar model in a sense that they embrace the idea that learning does not stop at graduation. And so all workers are encouraged to continuously acquire new skills throughout their careers. This lesson is powerful in a sense that it builds a culture of lifelong learning. Now, I think that the African continent as a whole is a lifelong learning engine or machine, in a sense that if you look at our ability to learn new dances, to put out content from a creative perspective, what I do think we need to do from an education perspective is harness that ability and inculcate that culture that, there are multiple learning platforms that are free in some instances, and others you only pay after you get a degree. We need to be able to get a message out there to young people that no skill from a digital perspective is too small, that we don't need to have a certificate to recognize that skill, but what matters the most is that it's a relevant skill in terms of from an economic strategy perspective and an execution perspective, and therefore encourage at a global, massive scale this culture of lifelong learning in terms of skills that are relevant. Now, the question is, how do we get to the answer of what skills are relevant in the first place? I have a master's in entrepreneurship, and I'm a big supporter of the Schumpeterian worldview, which is that capitalism creates what we call creative destruction, in the sense that from an innovation perspective, new innovations create a new equilibrium by destroying what was previously known. For example, if you think about the advent of electricity, which then destroys, using fire to fuel certain activities, that destroys that, but creates a new equilibrium in terms of efficiency and convenience. The same applies to artificial intelligence, and actually the same applies to how we think about economic strategy from a country perspective. That our economic strategy should really be to do a couple of things. One, it is to find our competitive advantage, or our point where we excel, and one of that is actually young people. We are the youngest population in the world, and we are projected to grow that population, whereas countries like Japan are aging, and China's even aging as well. And so that becomes a source of competitive advantage. And then secondly, the key thing is, how do we make sure that the creativity that we have, the ability for young people to produce content at scale, is harnessed as part of that competitive strategy? And then thirdly, how do we make sure that we look at all the centers of excellence and pockets of excellence that exist in the country from an artificial intelligence perspective, and how do we make sure that we bring all of these elements together to create a competitive economic strategy? If you think about textiles or clothing as an example, there's a way that which harnessing, and this is just me thinking out loud, there's a way in which we can harness the creativity of young people and the technology aspect of it to create completely new, intelligent clothes that are fit for purpose in our African context, in terms of our weather, in terms of climate change, and so on. And so we need to be thinking about, firstly, economic strategy at that level, but then secondly, making sure that we power young people in terms of having access to multiple learning pathways, whether it is a skill that they pick up on a platform like Coursera, whether we create our own Coursera, and that actually entry jobs, we need to think of them in terms of not gatekeeping that those entry jobs need to have certain accreditation. It should really be about skills level based recruitment. And then lastly, corporates really need to rally around young people, exposing them to the most relevant skills as they themselves adapt to this new environment. So those are my reflection on Youth Day. And in closing, I really do want us to further reflect on this, that pathway from education to skills development to earning, your first entry job and earning, and ultimately to coming, escaping poverty, is actually being disrupted. How do we think about models that are agile enough, that are responsive enough and efficient enough to address the crisis that we face from a youth unemployment perspective, but also give us a competitive advantage? Thank you for joining this episode. I look forward to your thoughts as well, but stay tuned, and in the future,